Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for being such a wonderful storyteller. And don't go too far. I'd like to call both Naomi and Thomas back on stage for our dialogue. Well, thank you both very, very much. I have so many questions, I don't know where to start, but I will with a question that I think relates to both of you, what you've said today and your written work. Stories and literature can be liberating, but they can also trap us in dangerous places. So I wonder, what do you think some of the most dangerous stories in Canada are?
Well, if we could find them, we could shoot them. Hey, Joseph, you want to go hunting? Go ahead. These are all unrehearsed questions.
Well, I think, you know, one of the things that comes up in the climate change stuff is that climate change denial, like just the really hard denial of the science itself, is not a global phenomenon. It is almost exclusively a phenomenon of the Anglo-Saxon world. So where you have strong climate change denial movements are obviously the United States, Alberta, and you know, pretty strong climate change denial in Canada, not as bad as the U.S., but very strong in Alberta for some reason, and Australia, huge. So I think that this, there's definitely a relationship between settler colonialism and just like dealing with natural limits. So I think like the sort of the story of infiniteness, right, is a really dangerous story that is a huge part of the colonial imagining of Canada and the sort of place of the vastness of wilderness. And you know, you still hear that if you go to Fort McMurray, you know, it's like, well, there was no one here. There were just trees, right? They sound like Captain Cook, you know? And so like, I think that Canadian storytelling, there is this idea of the vastness, right? And if it's vast, then you can do whatever, right? Vastness has no limit. So so I think like climate change denial is not a thing in France or Germany, and so I think there's something about even in European countries where like hitting up against natural limits, and obviously that's when you go on a colonial plunder, right, and find somebody else's trees. But there's something interesting there in that story. And then of course there's, you know, the story, I go back and forth on, I mean, the story of Canada the Good is also its own kind of damaging story. Sometimes it can be useful, right? I mean, you can sort of, I think you can make a short-term peace with it, but I wonder at what cost, you know, is reinforcing this idea of some sort of mythic moment in Canada when all was good. You know, pre-Harper or something. Yes. Your turn.
Yeah. I guess I'm working on a new novel, and I suppose I have this sort of idea in mind as I'm trying to work my way through the book, which isn't going all that well. So please don't say, when will it be out? You know, later
Never.
on. Never. It may never be out.
No, I mean, never ask.
Never.
Rule number one, never ask a writer.
Never ask a writer, that's right. What are you working on? I don't know, macrame today. The idea that human beings are important, as a matter of fact, within the hierarchy of sentient, living, non-sentient creatures, that we are the most important one, and so everything should be set up to accommodate us, which is, it's a terrible idea. I know as I go around the countryside, every so often somebody will say, well, you don't want us to live like animals, do you? And I say, well, we are animals. And if you mean, should we cut our consumption down to the point where we just use what we need to use? Yeah, it's not a bad idea at all. But we've got this idea that we really are very, very, very important to the planet that we're on. And quite frankly, we're not. If we all disappeared tomorrow, it wouldn't even miss us. Matter of fact, quite frankly, except for the nuclear power plants and a couple of really toxic waste dumps around the world, it would probably be better off. And that's kind of a horrible idea to have of yourself, that not only are you not needed, but you really are kind of a pain in the ass on the planet. But we continue to tell that story, how important we are, how important we are to the world, important to each other, how human beings create all these wonderful, marvelous things. Yeah, we do that. We also do some terrible, destructive things at the same time. And until we can figure out our relationship with the planet and balance that off and reduce some of that destruction, and it's a dangerous story that we continue to tell ourselves. I know I tell myself that. I think, well, I'm going to give a talk at the U of T tonight. I must be important. I must be really a tall onceler. And I got a big bloody candle. I'm not going to give it up. That's a dangerous story to tell. And we tell it and we believe it, and we tell it again and again and again. We tell it to our kids and they believe it, and on we go merrily along through life.
So some of the dangerous stories are the very stories we create ourselves then, right? I watched a very interesting documentary recently by Warren Carreau, another wonderful writer, a Métis writer from Meadow Lake, Alberta. And his documentary is called Land of Oil and Water, and he's tracking the tar sands impact on the indigenous communities in Alberta, specifically because there is a lot of discussion in his own community about oil, taking advantage of the oil resources there. And what struck me in his interviews with members of his community is the conflict between the notion of progress and the fear of what the impact of that progress will be. And so I wonder whether you could talk about that kind of paradox or irony, that on the one hand, those indigenous communities are looking into taking advantage of the oil resources because that will bring jobs in the community and all of that. But on the other hand, they're profoundly aware of the irony of doing so in the name of progress. So is progress yet another dangerous story we have to kind of weave ourselves out of it?
Well, I'll tell you a story about that story. This is, I don't know, maybe you know about this, Naomi. It must be 25 years now. There was a lot of activity on the Crow Reserve in Montana over coal and oil. Yeah. And maybe even natural gas. And the large companies went in to meet with the Crow Council and representatives of the Crow Nation. And part of the problem was, at that point in time, most of the Crows were in favor of leaving the oil and coal and gas in the ground. And the companies were saying, well, okay, sure, but how are we going to get it out? And they would say, no, we want to leave it in. But if you leave it in, you can't do anything with it. It's perfectly fine. It's been there for millions of years. It's not going anyplace. But we need it. And the Crows said, we don't need it. They say, yeah, you do, because you have to have economic growth. And the Crows said, well, not that way. Other ways that we can do that we can think of, we just leave it alone. But the question, you see, was not what to do with those resources. It was how to get them out of the ground, how much you'd have to pay people off to accept that. And the Crows were working with a completely different paradigm. They were saying, the place is just fine. We don't need it. It can stay there. But that was not an option. That was never an option within the negotiations. And they did get some of that opened up over the years, because it was never, the answer could never be nothing. The answer could never be, we're not going to touch that. That is not a natural resource as far as we're concerned. It is simply something that's there and it's going to stay there. It's part of the world in which we live. There's no point to take it out or to tear up the earth in order to get at it. I always like that story. Yeah. I wish it had ended differently.
Well, it may end differently, actually, because I did do some research in that region, and there is this plan to build a coal to liquid plant on the Crow Reservation, which is actually the dirtiest, worst fossil fuel, like liquefied coal, okay? And that's because there wasn't, I think it was because there wasn't a rail line to get the coal out. That was the problem. They could dig up the coal, but they didn't actually have a way to transport it out. So if they liquefied the coal, then they could pipe it out or something. Anyway, it was an Australian company. They hired a Crow artist. It was, and it was called the Many Stars coal to liquid plant. But actually, the funding for it fell through. And it doesn't look like it's going to get constructed. But it was interesting is that there was huge resistance to it, and particularly there was even stronger resistance among the Northern Cheyenne, right next door.
Right next door.
And I heard a lot about the idea that coal was the liver of the earth, that coal is a natural water filter, right? Yeah. So I think we have this discourse which kind of, and I try to be conscious of not doing it. I do it a lot, where it's sort of like, the fossil fuels are the enemy, and it's not that they're evil. They're serving a function where they are, and they are actually sequestering toxins. Mm-hmm. The problem is when you dig it up and you burn it and release it. That's a problem, but coal's not evil, and neither is bitumen. It's just we're doing the wrong things with it. But yeah, this idea of just wrapping, like the inability to get, to wrap our heads around the idea of leaving sources of carbon that we know are there in the ground. I mean, this is the debate that's really heating up now around climate change, because it's never been part of the discussion around what to do about climate change. It's all this, well, we're going to, bring in carbon trading and offsetting and capping, but it's all at the consumer end. Mm-hmm. It's not just, why don't we not dig it up, right? No. And we have not ever, in any kind of systematic way, talked about dealing with it at the production end. So now there's a big push, and the Guardian newspaper has launched this "Keep It in the Ground" campaign. I mean, it's not like a new idea.
Keep it in the ground. I like this.
Yeah, keep it in the ground. This is an idea, this comes from the Niger Delta originally in the fight against shale oil. And they successfully have kept the oil in Agoni land underground, and they kicked shale out. So there's precedent for it. But, coming back to your original question too, I mean, I think, I don't know if it's the notion of progress per se. I mean, obviously that is a huge issue in our culture, this equation of progress with growth. And I don't think we need to let go of the idea of progress. I don't personally find that to be such a damaging idea. It's how we define progress that is damaging. And I think that a lot of us yearn for progress, and I think we need to redefine it, not let go of it. Mm-hmm. But in terms of Northern Alberta, the thing about fossil fuels is that they end up being the last resource standing. They end up being the last opportunity standing, because they have this totalizing effect, right? Like, you dig it up and you poison everything, and you can no longer live off the land because the animals are sick and the fish are sick, and then it's like, well, lo and behold, you need to go get a job, and the only people hiring are Syncrude. Mm-hmm. So there's a really exciting initiative happening in Alberta to bring renewable energy to First Nations communities, so that there are alternatives to those jobs at Syncrude. And another model of progress where the resource, it's not just about getting a corporate-owned wind farm or solar farm where all the jobs go to outsiders and all the money goes out of the community, but that it's owned. And Fort Chipewyan First Nation has its first solar installation now.
Yeah, the important thing that came across in that documentary for me was, and that was their way of dealing with this idea of progress, that progress, as you very well put it, is not bad by default. It's a matter of how we go about it. is the point that by being involved in the beginning of that process, they hope to have an impact on policy and on the very ways in which those resources may be used or applied. So, yeah. Thomas?
Some of you in the room here are as old as I am, maybe even older, who knows. Wasn't it General Electric that had a motto that was "Progress is our most important product"? Wasn't that GE years back? I never could figure out what that was supposed to mean. I didn't know if it was the products that GE produced or just this general notion that progress, whatever it was, this ethereal thing, and that as we would see it as it happened, but we had no idea what it was at the time. When you said that, progress, I still don't know what it is.
But I mean, I have to believe that we're capable of progress, because if we're not, we're screwed. Like, we need to progress from where we are right now to some other place, which is a lot less dangerous, and that involves a transition, an evolution. I mean, maybe it's another word besides progress, but I think, stasis is not good, because the status quo is lethal.
Yeah, well, progress has always been something that the West has valued, and that was where my question was coming from. It's, I guess I think that both of you in your work and tonight identify as the culprit, or one of the culprits, of the climate changes and crisis we're facing, neoliberalism. So what do you think the role of government should be in this neoliberal climate?
I wish they changed the term. I'm afraid that I know what neoliberalism is supposed to mean, but I really resent it. It makes it sound as though liberalism of any kind is responsible for the mess we have ourselves in right now. I mean, I don't know, I call it neoconservatism or what I'd call it, but I wish we had a different term for it.
Yeah.
It's a bothersome term. My partner and I have conversations about this, arguments.
So what would be a better term?
I don't know what would be a better term. I mean, I understand this is kind of a free market philosophy. Is it not? Help me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's a term that gets used that much in Canada, but it's the term that gets used most in the rest of the world to describe this sort of liberation project of capital. And everybody has different definitions of liberalism, and so yeah, these sort of the ultra-free market economists define themselves as liberals. They're liberating capital.
Really?
Yeah, but yeah, it's privatization, deregulation, cuts to government spending, paid for with tax cuts. Yeah, it's the whole package.
And that's
neoliberalism.
And that's sort of liberal philosophy.
But I think in Canada,
stance.
where we have a liberal party that defines itself against a conservative party that's much more neoliberal, it gets really murky and confusing. Yeah.
Liberal arts education takes on a whole
Call
new
them
meaning.
jerks. You know?
Well, I'll take you a little bit further or away from neoliberalism, but not too far from it. What is the role of art in a world structured around profit margins and framed by balance sheets? The role of art.
The role of art in a world, commercial world, in a commercial world. Well, I suppose, for me at least, when I start to write, I want to try to figure out the world that I'm looking at. It's the world in which I live, and I should be able to understand it, and frankly, much of the time I don't. I don't know why we don't do the things we should be doing, or at least the things I think we should be doing. And so I try to go after those. I try to find out why we don't. I try to explain it in my fiction and in my nonfiction, for that matter, too, because I really don't draw much of a line between those two, as many of you might know. Boy. This is where I'm no good. This is where you should take me off the stage and send me back to my room to write, because I need lots of time to think about stuff like that. I simply try to use my art to explain that world to myself and to the people who read my work. And I do my darndest to figure it out. You know, why we do the things we do, why we think the ways we think, why we cannot make the kinds of moves we constantly tell ourselves we should be making. We have this sort of schizophrenia, although maybe schizophrenia is the wrong term, in which we talk in groups. For instance, if we broke ourselves down into 4 or 5 groups here in this room, and we talked about the things we should be doing, we come up with some really good ideas. And then we go home, we forget about those ideas. And we do that over and over and over and over again. And I suppose if you want to define that as a form of mental illness, you can, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's what we've been doing. And we cannot seem to get off that mark. And I think art is one of the ways in which we can flash freeze that image for a moment and say, hey, stop and look at this. This is what it looks like. This is what it looks like. And then maybe, my hope, as I said before, is that if I tell the right story in the right way, things will change. I haven't managed that yet. So I keep trying. If you have any suggestions, let me know. On second hand, no, don't email me. No.
Yeah, I'm not so good at these questions, though, the reason why I, wanted to quote the Ursula Le Guin speech tonight is because I do, increasingly feel like that, really kind of liberated imagination is so critical at this point, because it really does feel that, and this is, I as a nonfiction writer and as a journalist, like, I really do sort of sense the wall that I'm hitting up against. Like, I don't feel like I personally have the skills to go far enough beyond just like defining what the problem is and sort of hinting at, places to go. But I think that what we really need is just help, imagining different futures. And it really is, we need a kind of a liberation project of our own imaginations. And I think that art plays that role. And I think that there are political moments as well where we sort of feel that sense of the possible, like, okay, we're going off script and I can taste this other world that makes me feel that, we are not as trapped as I thought, right? So, I think it isn't only art that does that. I also think we do that together in those moments where, it's not just a march, it's like it's a liberation. And that was, one of the things that, I think Occupy Wall Street had that feeling for a little while. When I was in New York for the, those early weeks, and it had that feeling of just like all of a sudden people were surprising each other, and so I think I think that art must provide that, and and the key thing is that it isn't always going to be profitable, right? And the pressures now, the market pressures now on artists. I wonder whether they're not so great that those people who might open those doors for us are never getting that opportunity. We're hearing a lot from established writers, who have that freedom. And I would include like Margaret Atwood's fiction in this. I think that her science fiction, has played a really important role. I think the whole cli-fi genre is getting kind of complicated, where we're sort of repeating this same story of like, we're screwed, we're gonna, like, this is the apocalyptic narrative that, is very much drawing on, biblical stories of, the chosen few, and it's the Hunger Games, and it's like, it's this same story we're telling there. And at a certain point, like, we told ourselves, well, that's going to wake people up. Like, we're gonna see this and we're gonna go, no, we don't want to go down that road, right? But that's actually not. That's not what's happening when people just go to the multiplex over and over again to hear the same story in different incarnations. It's actually reinforcing the idea that there's only one story, like only one possible outcome, which is why I think that call, and Le Guin, I think, is one of the few people who pulls off utopian science fiction. And it's really tough to do, but But that's what I feel we need more of than just like this idea that we're going to be scared into action by looking at where this is all leading.
We're not going to be scared into action because by the time we get to that point, it'll be much too late to do anything. So scariness just doesn't work. I've been sort of emboldened by, of all books, Don Quixote. And it's an odd thing because you have Don Quixote, who really is kind of a crazy guy. I mean, he goes off and he goes trying to find giants, and he runs into windmills, and we all know that he's just a stupid old man on a broken down horse with a buddy who he cons into riding along with him, Sancho Panza on his ass, Don Quixote on his horse. But as I look at that guy, I say to myself, you know what? He's not sitting in front of a television set. You know? He's out there on the road. Sure, the giants are windmills. He's made a mistake about that, and he gets beat up time and time again. But he wants to be a hero, and he's trying to do something. And in that alone, I have a lot of respect for the guy. And so I say to myself, you know, am I as good as Don Quixote? And the answer is no. No, of course, I'd look really silly on a horse. I'm much too tall. And there are no windmills for me to rail at, but there are other things that I suppose I could do if I wanted to. And, you know, it's just that sense of talk and action. The other thing I wanted to say was that one of the things that's happening in the publishing industry now is that many of the larger houses or even the medium-sized houses have been bought up, and the publishing industry has shrunk. And I know firsthand that the novels, for instance, novel side, the novels that the publishing houses are looking for are those novels that are commercial novels, very commercial, can be made into movies. You can make, you know, action figures, everything else in and around that. And what they're not interested in to any great degree anymore are literary novels, or novels actually that, you know, do the kinds of things that Atwood was able to do earlier on, that Le Guin did. So that whole area of art is beginning to shrink in on us. I don't know what's going to happen with it. Writers who used to be published, you could just count on being published, who were, you know, intellectual, you know, who talked about these things, all of a sudden they're not being published now. Especially in the States. It really, I've noticed it quite dramatically in the US, but it's also happening in Canada. One of my publishing houses has been just, you know, everybody's been bought up by this great German conglomerate. I'm almost afraid to say it because I would like to have my next novel published. But it's spooky, it's scary. If you're a writer, it's a scary thing to look at, especially for younger writers. I'm at the end of my road, but there are a lot of good younger writers out there who may never even see a publication.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Yeah, the middle brow novel has gone underground, but I think this may lead to what we witnessed in the 70s and early 80s, the rise of the small press culture, local publishing perhaps, so let's hope that's not the end of a lot of literary voices. I'm conscious of the time, and I want to end with one final question about the media. Both of you in your work talk about the media and the role the media play. And I wonder what the media can do better or differently to help with the very issues we've been talking about, and if there is any more, any role that you see the social media playing as well.
Who wants to jump first? You want me to? Well, I sure as hell wish they would ask some intelligent questions. I don't know what's happened to long-form journalism, either in print media or on television and radio, but I do lots of interviews, and every so often I get a good one. somebody who really, has thought things out and asks intelligent questions. But the rest of the time, I am wallowing in what's your favorite color? Not that question exactly, no moans, that's just my being bitchy about it. Bambi. But really, I mean, the level of conversation that I have in and around art, in and around my own work, in and around the work of other writers is pretty, oh, God, I don't want to say Bambi again. It is pretty juvenile, and it is pretty simplistic. And I would just love to run into somebody who was writing a story, who had some really good questions for me. Maybe it's just the nature of when a book comes out, they all ask you the same question. I should talk with Joseph and Lee afterwards and say, am I being cruel and unjust about this? But I'll get the same question all the way across, and they're snowball questions. They just melt before they even hit the ground. And that's disappointing, because if you write a serious book, we've both written serious books. I think they're serious books.
But sometimes the publisher is, I think, a little bit responsible for that, because they put together the media kit, right? And they put together all these questions at the end of the book. For example, I just finished teaching green grass, running water in my graduate course. And one of the things that I found interesting was that my edition did not have all these explanations of all the references in the book. And I think that they do play a role, the publishers, and how they try to market literature in terms of the kinds of questions they may elicit from the media.
Maybe, but I was a journalist. And, those questions are all well and good, but I think a good journalist tosses those away and figures out questions that need asking. Hard questions, not just the easy stuff.
What's your experience with the media, Naomi, in terms of how they take a message or a complicated narrative like the one you're presenting, and this changes everything, and try to communicate it, or, what's your sense of how they've done it, or what the role should be in facilitating a narrative like yours?
Well, I was really struck, frankly, by how much fear there was in Canada, particularly at the CBC. To talk about these ideas. I mean, with some exceptions, N writes in a phase where he's just like, he's in fighting mode. I kept having this experience where I would go on CBC and I would say tar sands, and they would say, well, oil sands, And then I found out that they had recently gotten a memo saying that they're not allowed to say tar sands. And so, they felt the need to correct me. So this happened with Wendy Mesley, where she said, we say oil sands. I was like, well, you say oil sands. I can say whatever the hell I want. I don't work for the CBC.
So they think that,
but honestly, I really worry that CBC journalists, with some notable exceptions, do not have a self-preservation instinct. They are so afraid, and they think that by not putting a foot wrong, they're going to save themselves, when actually they need to be out there going, we are under attack, and they need to be talking, they need to be defending the idea of non-profit media in the public interest, and they won't. They won't. And I'll tell you, they will be defending it until the doors close. And I saw this when I was reporting on the book. I was in Greece, and Greece is experiencing absolutely brutal austerity. It's, I'm sure. And but what was incredible was, I was there researching for the book. I was reporting on this gold mine in northern Greece from a Canadian gold mining company called El Dorado.
is that in the north? Yeah.
Colonialism has come back to Europe. They are looting themselves with Canadian companies. The conquistadors have come home. And so I was doing interviews on public media in Greece, and they were defending the government line so vehemently. But we have to do this, what alternative is there? But they were so defensively defending this idea. And a month after I left Greece, they shut down the public broadcaster, and the journalists finally occupied their media outlets, and they were doing guerrilla broadcasts from inside. But I was joking that that with the lights out, they would still be defending austerity, but after the plug had been pulled, And I compare this, I was just launched the book in France last week, and there was a strike at France Culture, which is this is the flagship French public broadcaster. And there are so many spots on France Culture where you can go on, talk about books and ideas for 40, 50 minutes, many of them, right? It's not just like there's one show where you can do it. There are many. But, they were, en grève. They were in battle mode against these cutbacks and defending the principles of public broadcasting. And they actually brought me in. The union just said, we're gonna go back on the air this morning, and we're gonna bring you on, and we want you to tell the story about how your grandfather was an animator at Disney and got fired and blacklisted, and tell that whole story, because that's what we want to put on the air today, right? So it was so combative. And they understand that they're fighting for a principle, they're fighting for principles of public broadcasting and solidarity, and they're fighting, right? So I mean, what kills me is that CBC is under attack, and they are so scared and so neoliberalized that they will not defend themselves. And they're going to turn off the light. And so I'm pretty worried about that.
I should mention as a footnote, as a Greek Canadian, that there were a lot of protests against the closure of the public broadcaster, but the new government in Greece has promised to reinstitute the radio station. Well, on this note of having to change the ethos of the media, I want to thank you both for stimulating presence and talk and ideas. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's on. It's on? Okay, thank you. We're going to move to the next part of our program. I was in the middle of organizing this lecture when Lee Maracle approached me and invited me to participate in a special event, thank you, Naomi, a stolo robing ceremony in which she was planning to honor Thomas King. Since I had already booked Thomas King, and believe me, it was not easy, and it was not easy booking Naomi Klein either, I thought we could combine the two events. And so it's indeed a real honor to host this special event in this inaugural Avie Bennett lecture. Lee Maracle has been a major figure in her own right in the Indigenous world in Canada, one of the very first Indigenous authors to gain a wide readership and a major source of inspiration in her community and beyond. I would like to invite Lee Maracle up on the stage to let her explain to you the meaning and value of this robing ceremony. Please welcome Lee Maracle.
A blanket for us is a robe of power. I'm a Stalo woman, which is part of the Stapmux Nation, or Salish people, if you will. I'll say it in English from now on, Salish. That's your language. We build these blankets to, first of all, stand our people up. Without a blanket, there is no standing facing the sky. There's no facing the water. There's no facing the animal world. And there's no facing the human world. And so we create what we call robes of power, which allow you to not only face the world, but to face yourself as well. We build these blankets for people who have, in their journey, created a path for others that feels honorable. It feels like if I follow this path, I will be a human being. Our people consider themselves spirit beings trying to be human, very much like the Crees do. I don't know about people out here, but that's how we see ourselves. And so I have created quite a few blankets for my own people. I've never actually created one for someone outside of Stop Mix people. You'll be the first, Tom. But I met Tom a long time ago, and I want to just explain how I see him. In the center, first of all, I wanted to do waves and, you know, all this kind of stuff, and it wouldn't happen. So I put all my cloth in front of me, all these little bits, and I went to sleep surrounded in it like a little cocoon, like a child, and said, help me out here, because I only got another 10 days. And this started to come forward, and in the center is the spirit of Tom and his storytelling, and surrounded by water. Inside the windows of water, the dark represents the deep imagination, and the light represents, believe it or not, bright water. And then the white around it is the purity of his thought and his storytelling, and the honesty and truth that he's seeking. And on the outside, where all those colors are, which is what I actually started with when I woke up the next morning, I just started sewing all these pieces together, is his journey. And we say we cross the world, walk the world across rocks, very often sharp stones. But if we have the beauty way inside us, which is color, then the journey is made light. And so that's Tom, lots of color. And then on the outside, the squares represent his relationship with things in the world, or at least how I see his relationship, again, through the windows of color. The pieces of cloth are well chosen. In my world, instead of giving you tobacco, they either give you salmon or they give you something to contribute to your art. Sometimes people give me books. I don't read them, I write, no. Anyway, but lots of times I've been given cloth. So in this blanket is cloth from all over the world. There's Egyptian cotton, Javanese dresses, cloth from India, cloth from just everywhere that my friends have been, and they've brought me a yard or two, and I've cut it up. I'm also a bit crazy, I think. I like creating the illusion of order and symmetry, because I think mostly chaos is wonderful. And so I cut the pieces without cutting them the same size, and then I try to make them look like they are. So that's a little like Tom too, in some strange way. And so I offer him this robe of power. All my good thoughts are in this blanket. Hechka. I had to pick two people, a female and a male, to speak to Tom personally. So Smaro, it will go first, and then followed by Joseph Boyden with the actual honoring speeches.
Thank you, Lee, for inviting me to be part of this Tolo ceremony. It is a real pleasure, indeed an honor, to have the opportunity to acknowledge how important a figure Thomas King has been in both the indigenous and non-indigenous worlds on Turtle Island. Thomas King, who grew up in California, has a double heritage, Greek on his mother's side and Cherokee on his father's. Perhaps it is because of this doubleness being both of immigrant and indigenous stock, a Greek Cherokee American who has ended up in Canada, that Thomas King has the gift of knowing how to deal with and bridge borders. Cultural and national borders, spiritual and religious borders, and above all, the borders between indigenous and white people. A gift he has been sharing with his readers for a long time now, a gift for which I, for one, am grateful. Here is an example, a story from within the large web of stories in Green Grass, Running Water, his masterpiece of a novel that gives you a taste of how seamlessly and evocatively he blends these worlds. First, woman's garden. That good woman makes a garden and she lives there with Adam. I should explain that Adam is spelled A-H-D-A-M-N. So there is that garden, and there is first woman and Adam, and everything is perfect, and everything is beautiful, and everything is boring. So first woman goes walking around with her head in the clouds, looking in the sky for things that are bent and need fixing. So she doesn't see that tree, so that tree doesn't see her, so they bump into each other. Pardon me, says that tree, maybe you would like something to eat. That would be nice, says first woman, and all sorts of good things fall out of that tree. Apples fall out, melons fall out, bananas fall out, hot dogs, fried bread, corn, potatoes, pizza, extra crispy fried chicken. Thank you, says first woman, and she picks up all that food and brings it back to Adam. Talking trees, says that God. God in the novel is a dog. What kind of a world is this? Did someone say food, says Quixote. Sit down, I says. Boy, this story is going to take a long time. Thomas King has written 16 books in which he recreates our bent world and does so with a wicked sense of humor and political astuteness that are unequaled. He has had a career as fiction writer, as anthology and editor, university professor and critic, genre-bending historian, radio producer and actor. Not only has he excelled in all these different realms, but he has managed to bring them together and make each one work for the other through his unwavering belief in justice, his desire to fight colonialism and demythologizing native stereotypes, ultimately a desire that promises a better world for all of us. There are no sacred cows for Thomas King when it comes to poking fun at the untruths about indigenous people that the white world has constructed about them. He is truly a leading voice whose work is read and taught widely, not only in North America, but in Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Though, to use his own words, he is lousy in serving on community boards or getting involved in Aboriginal politics, he practices the kind of intellectual activism that makes a huge difference. For example, he was instrumental in helping establish the Enoching Center in Penticton, a unique post-secondary institution offering educational programs that enhance Aboriginal culture, language, political development, and leadership in Aboriginal arts training. Through such actions that have a lasting impact, Thomas King has demonstrated over a long span of time his commitment to effecting change and doing so through collaboration and dialogue with others. From his involvement in the American Indian movement in the US in the late 60s and early 70s, to his CBC Radio 1 program, Dead Dog Cafe Comedy Hour, which ran for 4 seasons from 1997 to 2000, from his novels and short stories to his unconventional A Short History of Indians in Canada, a book based on the Massey lectures he delivered in 2003, Thomas King has been developing what we can call Coyote pedagogy. Coyote pedagogy is a pedagogy that encourages the crossing of borders, that alerts us to the fact that we are all insiders and outsiders in some way, entangled in a web of untruths and preconceptions that Thomas King, via the trickster Coyote, teaches us to unlearn. If history shows that as a species we are slow learners when it comes to respecting the rights of others, this is a lesson that King's Coyote too has to learn. This is part and parcel of Coyote pedagogy. As one of King's narrators says to Coyote, pay attention or we'll have to do this again. Forget being helpful and listen. Thomas King is not someone who has made his mark only in the literary and cultural fields. He is the kind of person who will come to your rescue if you happen to live on his street and have had your water pipes frozen, or go and check real estate for you and send you detailed reports if you need to buy a house in his town but you happen to still live on the other side of the country, as was the case with me when 10 years ago I was about to move to Guelph from Victoria. He is generous, and although he is tall and you can't miss him, truly he's the tallest Greek Cherokee or Cherokee Greek I know. He's unassuming and humble, a quality that makes him even more special. Thomas, thank you for your words and for being you.
My writer for this gig specifically asked for a plastic-wrapped pallet of bottled water and liquefied coal M&Ms, and I got none of it in my dressing room, so thanks a lot, Avie Bennett. When you're as successful as Thomas King, a true Renaissance man, novelist, essayist, professor, photographer, bank teller, it's true, photojournalist, broadcaster, screenwriter, ambulance driver, it's true. Politician, sadly it's true. And certainly all-around trickster. When you're that successful, it should be not just okay but expected that you sit back on your laurels and relax a little bit, take the world in, and let others do a bit of the heavy lifting for a while. But no, not my friend Tom King. In what should be considered the start of his golden years, or as a Cherokee call it, the moon that lights the path to moving in with the kids so they can finally look after me for once. Or what the Greek call, Opa, it's my turn, suckers, to move in with you and start partying. Thomas cemented himself as one of our country's most vital and powerful voices. In these last couple of short years, the Inconvenient Indian won a whack of awards: the 2014 RBC Taylor Prize, the CBA Libris Prize, finalist for the 2013 Hillary Weston Writers Trust Prize, 2014 Burt Award for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit literature. It goes on and on. But more than that, much more than that, the Inconvenient Indian is changing and will continue to change the way our nation looks at its relationship with its original inhabitants. Not to outdo himself, Mr. King shows up the next year, I might add, in 2014, like one of those slightly older, slightly wiser marathon runners at the starting line, wearing a 1970s sweatband around his head and rocking a handle broom mustache, his gym socks pulled up a little too high, his running shorts maybe just a little too short, and then proceeds to blow away the competition with his novel, The Back of the Turtle, which takes him home the Governor General's Award, finally, for Novel of the Year. But it's not the prizes that are most impressive. What's most impressive to me is that while writing these two tomes, Thomas King was not just changing a nation's discourse, was not just reinterpreting the most important dialogue that this country faces, was not just entertaining us with his incredible trickster skills, he was also completely renovating his own home. I'm not just talking about changing out sinks in the bathroom or the color of the living room. If I'm to believe what Tom's told me over the last few years, he's single-handedly lifted he and Helen's house off of its foundation, moved it to a much more ideal location, turned it from a modest middle-class abode and into possibly the most fancy yet restrained digs in all of Guelph. On the outside, I hear that he fools even the most Protestant of settlers into believing that inside those walls lives a man worthy of a high position with the Masons. But on the inside, oh boy, it's a res fantasy come to life, with a Sacagawea and Lewis and Clark themed bedroom, an indoor outhouse, and a fry bread making station in the kitchen. I'll admit publicly that when I first met Thomas King more than a decade ago, I was really nervous and wearing an ill-fitting tuxedo. This was my first big Toronto literary to-do, one of those galas with lots of tables, and you know your place by how far back from the stage and the MC you are. All I remember for sure is that someone grabbed me and took me by the hand and led me up through the maze of tables up to Thomas King and introduced us, saying something like, "Tom, this is Joseph, and I'm pretty sure he's one of you too." I could see him size me up with that deft up and down of a judge. And later that night, when he found me again, he gathered me by the arm and told me these sage words of Indian wisdom. "Joseph," Tom said, "people will give you all kinds of advice, but the best advice I can offer you at this point in your career is to find yourself a good tailor." We've been great friends ever since. Thomas King is a writer, a thinker, a speaker, a thoughtful and wise and funny and serious voice who's cutting a wide and important trail through the forest that's North America. He's made this trail that so many of us writers now try to follow. And sometimes, those of us who follow him, sometimes we might even be fool enough, big-headed enough to think we might eventually catch up, not to pass him, but simply to experience his long-legged gait, to hear him utter just a few words of truth that we might take into our heart. But Thomas King, he's fast as a coyote. If you're really lucky, you might just get a glimpse of those two tall gym socks flashing white as he rounds the bend ahead of you, or hear him laughing just over the rise, urging you to keep going. And you won't even notice as you run by him, breathing hard, that Tom King watches you through the trees as you race to try and catch up, his eyes twinkling, his lips curling just slightly before he bounds out from the trees and hits that pace again. Miigwech, Tom, for everything.
I'm going to invite Smaro Kamboureli, my friend, to help me robe Thomas.
Raise it up. Well, I'm glad they did this in the wintertime. Middle of July, I'd be sweating right about now. I'm never all that comfortable with kind words. They're appreciated. They are. I just never think that. I've spent my life creating a shell, if you will, or at least a defense to where I don't have to worry about things getting to me, getting at me, unless I really want them to. And this kind of event gets through all of that, and it's wonderful and it's uncomfortable at the same time. So I don't know what to do, but thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Lee, especially for just being Lee. I have a picture of Lee. I have a photograph of Lee up against the wall, a wall that no longer exists in Toronto. And to show her how much I care, I'm going to put that on the internet. And I tell Joseph he better be careful because I still have my cameras. If he gets too close. Actually, I thought he'd passed me a couple of times there. But it was just a blur, so I wasn't sure. Thank you, Joseph. It's Smaro. Thank you all. Thank you.
Well, we've come to the end of the evening. I want to thank profoundly Naomi Klein. She's been an inspiration for me, and it's been a real honor to have you open this event this year. Thank you. Of course, I want to also thank that guy, Tom King, but he's busy looking at his blanket, so. I want to thank Lee Maracle and Joseph Boyden for being part of this event as well. Before I let you go, I want to mention two things. There are books available for sale in the theater's foyer, and the 4 authors will be more than happy to sign a book for you. In fact, I have been told to mention that they will sign only books, no napkins or T-shirts, please, for a signature. To speed things up, because we need to vacate the theater by a certain time, I have 5 volunteers in the foyer who will direct you to the start of the right lineups for purchasing a book and having it signed. And talking about volunteers, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank these very 5 volunteers: Evangeline Holtz, who has been incredible, Prathna Lore, Nicole Burtz-Bailey, Christina Turner, James Hahn, and Nora Franklin, all PhD students in the Department of English. At the end of the very program you have received, I list all kinds of people within the University of Toronto who have been very helpful in helping me put this event together. But between the time the programs were printed and today, I managed somehow to accrue more debts. And so I'd like to acknowledge as well Marguerite Perry and Sangeeta Patswani of the English department, and Peter Freund from the Drama Center at the University of Toronto for the readiness and generosity with which they helped me deal with the last-minute issues that emerged. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the Isabel Bader Theatre staff. They have been really hospitable and wonderful. And of course, I want to thank you for being here, and I hope to see you next year. Thank you.